you of the Bible, the book of Deuteronomy. So the title, if you have a hands out, it's great. If you don't, we have them at the last table. The title, Deuteronomy, comes from the two Greek words, and deutero means second, okay, and nomos is the law, so it's second time giving the law. We are not at the Sinai, we are at the land, almost at the boundaries of the land, okay? So we need to draw it, I guess. So the first giving of the law was somewhere here, okay? Now we are roughly here. This is Moab, okay? On the boundary of Moab, at the very end of book of Deuteronomy, we'll read that Moses has a chance to go up on the hill or on the mountain and look and observe the whole land of the promise that he will have no chance to enter into. Okay? But before we'll go into that stuff, let me point out an important fact. Okay? We have first book of the Bible, which is what? Genesis. Good. Okay? Then we have Exodus. See, and we call it Exodus. Then the next one we call Leviticus. Then the next one we call Numbers. Okay, in Hebrew, the first one is Bereshit, in the beginning. And then the other one is called Shemot, even though it begins with Vav, which is, okay, in Hebrew it's Vav, the letter looks like this, but it's and. So, and the names of the sons of Jacob who came into the Egypt were like blah, blah, blah. So the whole book begins with and. I know it's very unregular for English language, but that's what it is. Then Leviticus also begins with and. And God called unto Moses, so on and so forth. The Numbers also begins with and. And then Deuteronomy does not. So some of the scholars looked at that and thought, maybe there was a period of time which is kind of like a gap between Numbers and Deuteronomy. So there are four books so four books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, that constitute one story, and then there is another story that begins with Deuteronomy. Because actually, then at Joshua we have and Judges begins with and. That's so funny. So when, if that's true, if that assumption is true, when Deuteronomy was written. And they go into 2 Kings chapter 22. We might want to jump there. 2 Kings chapter 22 talks about the king whose name is Josiah. So it's roughly mid-7th, I know, it's really odd to spell it. 7th century BC. Okay? When Moses leaves, as you have the dates, in 1405 they entered the land. Okay? So 700 years later, now look verse 8. Josiah was performing the restoration of the temple, and Hilkiah the high priest said to Shaphan the secretary, I found the book of the law in the house of the Lord. Okay? And literally what it says is what is here. I found it. Okay? Now, some scholars believe that they didn't find it, but they actually faked it. So that's when they wrote Deuteronomy to make sure that the power of the high priest and the power of the king would be centralized. So they believe, there are some scholars who believe that Deuteronomy was written 700 years after Moses. Okay? If you can twist the meaning of the words like that, you can come up with any kind of crazy ideas. Okay? That's the whole thing. Found is found. The problem is why they had to find it. Because it was not accessible to them? Yes, it was not. The thing is, Josiah's father, his name is Manasseh. Okay? And the guy ruled for about 55 years. More than 50 years, he was not believer. He pressurized the community of believers. He tried to get rid of any sample of scripture he would ever found. So therefore, no wonder the high priest had to find, literally, somewhere in the storage hidden, the scroll of Torah. So I have no problem that they really found it. Okay? Some people, as I said, believe that they faked it. They just wrote it. See, ink is still wet, but we found it. That's kind of crazy stuff they believe. Okay? So that's important to understand. That if you read something on documentary hypothesis, or acronyms that would say something like JEDP, those guys believe that there was no Moses, and actually the 5 books of Moses are comprised of 4 different sources, Yahweh's, Elohim's, Deuteronomy, and priestly codex, written in the different times, and not really connected with Exodus whatsoever. Usually Yahweh's is dated like 10th century BC. This is 8th century BC. This is 6th or 7th century BC. And this is post-exilic. Okay? But we don't believe it this way. I just want to let you know so you will have a clue if you'll run into a commentary with this kind of stuff. This is not biblical teaching, and it's not the teaching in our church. But going back, now, as I said, Moses has a chance to go on the hill and observe the land. Okay? He observes the land because he is not going to go into the land. And in his introduction, okay, what you have in the structure is part B. So we have a very short introduction. Moses speaks on the plain of Moab, which is kind of mirrored in chapter 34, A prime, as Moses dies on the mountain. Okay, so he speaks on the plain, he dies on the mountain. Okay, that's why it's parallel. Now B and B prime. B is historical overview of the journey. And then B prime is chapters 31 to 33, is historical succession. We have a person who succeeds, who goes after Moses. And we also have a song in chapter 32 and 33 for commemorating this event. But in his historical overview, we need to see 3 important verses. Okay? Chapter 1, verse 37. Can I have a volunteer to read it? Don't read it yet, but I just need somebody who will read it when I will ask. Okay? Okay, so I guess Vicky will be the volunteer for the first one. 137. Okay? 137. Then I guess Brandon wants to volunteer for 326. And since you are Snorky, yes, you're going to have, 42122. That's fine, Okay? Okay? So, please, we'll read them one by one and see how close they are to each other. So, 137.
Even with me, the Lord was angry on your account and said, you also shall not go in there.
Okay? Now, 326.
He's not here.
No, he's right there.
But the Lord was angry with me because of you and would not listen to me. And the Lord said to me, enough from you. Do not speak to me of this matter again.
Okay, and the matter is going into the land. Now, chapter 4, verses 21, 22.
Furthermore, the Lord was angry with me because of you, and he swore that I should not cross the Jordan, and that I should not enter the good land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance. For I must die in this land, I must not go over the Jordan, but you shall go over and take possession of that good land.
Okay? So Moses will stay on this side of Jordan and will not go into the land. And if you notice, especially in the first instance, in chapter 1, verse 37, what it says is, even with me the Lord was angry on your account. Or sometimes we can translate it as because of you. Okay? How do we understand it? So the reasons for Moses' death. Okay? Thing number one is by making sure that the Moses will stay on this side of Jordan and will not enter the land, because everybody saw that he was disobedient to God. It's an important lesson how seriously God treats sin of the leaders. Okay? Jesus later on says, to whom is much given as gifts or authority or responsibilities, it's much required. Okay? So seriousness of sin cannot be underestimated. Okay? We need to think about that. And the person who does something bad, a hungry boy who steals a loaf of bread from a store, that's one thing. Okay? When you have a leader who commits treachery, or who commits adultery publicly, or who disrespects other branches of power, that's a different story. Okay? Yes, every sin is an attempt to break a relationship with God. No questions asked. But especially in public matters, the sins of those who are on top are much more obvious, and the worst thing is, much more tend to be exemplified. Okay? People look at them and see, oh, if he can do or she can do that, and I will explain why I said she, and they get away, why cannot I? Okay? We have few he examples in the Bible, and Moses is one of them. But there is also a she example, which is very important for the book of Esther. Okay? The first queen, the wife of Ahasuerus or Artaxerxes. The thing is, she publicly humiliated the king by disobedience and not coming out with him to greet the people. And his advisors tell him, all the women in the country will, one way or another, they will hear about this story. If you will not discipline her somehow, we will have a mess in the country. It will be bad. So, first of all, it is important to see that this is seriousness of sin, especially sin of the leader. Okay? There is another thing. Okay? We know, and at the very end of Deuteronomy you can read, that the Moses was only guy to whom God talked face to face. Okay? And for unfortunate reason, and I've said it enough times, but I will repeat it at least once more. Humans are so creative that they can turn anything, even the good thing, they can turn into an idol. So even the grave of the great leader like Moses, with whom God had a very close relationship, could have and probably would have turned into an idol. Why I dare to say that? Let me show you an example that we once talked about. If we'll go into second book of Kings, in chapter 18, we'll find a very interesting thing, literally a thing. What we'll find there is the staff, not the staff actually, but the banner or staff with the banner that Moses used during the event that we talked about last time. Remember we talked about bronze serpent, okay? And the attack of serpents, that they would bite people, and it would be not simply painful. They would be in like a burning agony. So maybe it were regular serpents and would bite, and if you are bitten with a snake venom, it kind of burns. On the other hand, there is a chance that there was something, those creatures were somewhat different. Okay? They had a little bit more spiritual nature to them, so it were like a flying dragons, and they would breathe fire. But we're not going to go there right now. The point is, Moses used a pole with a banner with a depiction of snake, and everybody who would look at this snake, would look at this serpent, would be healed. Okay, now, what happened with that stuff? As many of the things, they are in the secret facility of the United States military. Same as the, covenant of the, Ark of the Covenant. Everything that, the great Professor Jones were able to collect from all over the world, that's just in the same place. You've seen those documentaries, did you? Okay? Now, the thing is, if you read 2 Kings chapter 18, it tells you something. Actually, that particular piece, this particular artifact is not there. Why? Because it was demolished. And we have it in the 2 Kings chapter 18. Now look at that. Verse 4 and further. He, Hezekiah, okay, we are talking about King Hezekiah, who ruled mid-8th century. So we just talked about Josiah. We are 1 century prior to that. He, Hezekiah, removed the high places and broke the pillars and cut down the Asherahs. And he broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for until those days the people of Israel had made offering to it, and it was called Nehushtan. Okay, now think about this. If they, let me restart differently, okay?
Page 2.
Yeah. Or in our case, it would be slide 2, okay? Or turn 2, okay? Our favorite timeline. Okay, that's the cross. This is 30 AD. Okay? 1445 BC, we have Exodus. Okay, roughly here, in 1000 BC, we have temple built. And about 586 BC, we have temple destroyed. Okay? So Nehushtan was destroyed roughly 740 BC. Okay? Now think about this. For 700 years, that thing was somewhere in Israel. And people would bring sacrifices and offerings to this stuff. And we are going through Joshua times, Judges times, the first King Saul, and then faithful David. Okay? And then Solomon, who builds the temple. We have the temple, but we still have these things somewhere, kind of like we have a sanctuary right here. But at the very far corner of our back 40, we have that thingy, and people can worship there and over there. And that's for everybody, and that's for some special people. It's like me, elders, and the property chair. We will have our candies, we will have a special cross. And that thing, that can maybe heal stuff. Think if you have like a problem with hands, you take it and pray, and it's released. Or if you have a problem with, with migraine, you just put your head against that pole, and it's, the power of the Lord comes to you, and the migraine is healed. What if you have a hemorrhoid?
That's complicated.
Okay? Now think about this. If they use the thing, that profoundly awkward way, how they would use the grave of Moses if they would know where it is.
Huh?
Yes.
Hasn't the Catholic Church actually maintained some of that same type of approaches, like certain artifacts and icons?
I am not Catholic, therefore I would allow myself not to answer that. Okay? What we know, probably what happened in 16th century, the reason why we are not Catholics, that's probably true. And it's very interesting that the guy who was a patron for Luther, Frederick the Wise, he actually had the biggest collection in the whole Europe. And there was a moment when it's like, really? So I spend all of my money for that and it doesn't really mean anything? It's hard to shift the gears and change your mentality. I understand. I'm not authorized to talk on the, let's say, current, stuff that goes on in the Catholic Church. At least within the U.S., I didn't see that as much as, let's put it this way, as I've heard. I'm not sure it's really true, but what I've heard about Latin America, that's kind of that stuff. But not only Catholics, what I can testify really is for Orthodox Church in Russia. We have some kind of movement within the Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod. People get so excited about Russian Orthodox Church. This is so cool, They have such a deep theology. Well, I was saying deep theology, but that's a different. So it's something weird and strange, and they want to get into that, and it's much more holier than Lutherans. Sure, yeah, right? Okay, until you go there. Because when you get there, every Saturday before the Trinity Day, it's called Parental Saturday. That's when you visit the grave of your parents. And you bring a shot of vodka, you bring some food, and you bring candies, and leave alone you drink and eat with your family, but you leave it for the parents. I don't know how else to treat it as not as a sacrifice.
It is.
So whatever is going on, so I don't know about that part, but there are oddity, and there are some things that, like the belt of Mary that she used to wear to make sure she will, have only one child, whatever that thing is, that was brought to Moscow, and people would stay like 3-4 hours in line to see and maybe touch and maybe kiss, and hopefully that those who were barren ladies, hopefully that would heal them or something, or vice versa. I don't know, whatever.
But yeah,
As I said, people are very creative. They can turn any good stuff into an idol. With the amount of the relics, there was a funny joke at Luther's days that if you collect all the pieces of the cross, you will be able to build a Noah's Ark. But it's our heritage. That's what it is, and we're kind of getting out of that altogether. But we need to remember our history. So that's the thing. So when we think about the wars of Moses, he did not allow me to cross the river on your account or for your sake, not because of you in the sense that this is your fault, but for your sake. It would be better for you that you would not know where my grave is. That's at least two important reasons. One of them is, again, let me reiterate. One is the seriousness of sin of leaders, and second one is most likely it avoided the perversion that could happen with his grave. Okay? Now, you have a structure. It's right here. Now, we've talked about A's and B's. Where are my glasses? And now C's. We have introduction into the teaching. I purposefully did not write the law as sometimes, and we will talk about this in a second. And then C prime is sanctions on keeping or breaking the teaching. So chapters 28, 29, and 30 have blessings and curses if you obey Torah or teaching or disobey. And then the central block, 6 through 27, is the sermon on 10 commandments. It's not tons of works, but there are works that kind of go through and try to dissect it and say that the first 6 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 are for the first commandment. And then you break them into pieces and see how the whole flow of the text describes the command. And that's true. We'll talk about this in a second. Now, why the word Torah, which regularly appears here, is better not to translate as the law, but as the teaching. See, unfortunately, we have it even in the name. As I said, Deuteronomy, okay? Second time giving of the law. And when we think about the law, we think about what? Piles of books and regulations, sometimes criminal, sometimes, civil? Is it civil? Am I right?
Yes.
I remember that. Mel came and gave our kids a great lesson on how to be a lawyer. And that was great. So we have criminal, we have civil, we have a bunch of norms, regulations, mechanical codes, different codes, probably medical stuff, how you can put the needle, what you do with syringe and all of this kind of stuff. That's what we think. We think about, speed limits or can you turn, on the red? Can you turn right on the red? Sometimes you can. Sometimes you have a sign and you cannot, and so on and so forth. The thing is, that's an unfortunate translation. There is a word in the Bible that would be better to use for the law, and it's actually judgments, something like that. But the word Torah comes from the verb, yara, which means to teach, to instruct. Therefore, it is much better to translate what Moses gave to people as the teaching. And let me show you an example where we have it in our translation of the Bible, picked up this very way. For the very beginning, let's go to Psalm 1. Okay, Psalm 1, we have, blessed is the man who does not, he doesn't do three things, but he does something, and the verse 2 tells us what he does.
Psalm what?
1.
But his delight in the law of the Lord.
Okay, so in Psalm 1,
Meditation
verse 2,
night.
that's that same word that translated as the law. Now let's go into Proverbs 31:26. And as you know, the book of Proverbs 31, verses from 10 to 31, has 22 lines, and it's a great song about the blessed wife, the great gift that any man can find, and it's like a perfect lady wisdom in life. Okay?
She speaks with wisdom.
Yeah, so verse 26 is the first line goes like this. She opens her mouth with wisdom. Now, look at the second line. And the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. So the word that stands for teaching is the same word Torah. Okay, and that would be better because we do have some rules and regulations in Genesis, in Exodus, in Leviticus, in Numbers, and in Deuteronomy. But those rules very often are intertwined with the stories, and they are presented not simply as cases, but as the history develops, we have those rules. Okay? Now, what is very important to see is how some of the rules are presented. For example, if we'll go into Deuteronomy chapter 5, and that would be a great lesson for you for the post-confirmation guys. All of you who have been confirmed, who studied the catechism, know the order of commandments. Now, let's read it in chapter 5 of Deuteronomy. If we'll begin with verse 6. Okay? I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me, and so on and so forth. So I'll spare some time. We'll go into, like, let's say verse 17. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you should not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not cover your neighbor's wife, and you shall not desire your neighbor's house, his field, his male servant, his female servant, his ox, donkey, anything that is of your neighbor's. Okay? Cool. If you will compare it with Exodus 20, where we have 10 commandments first time, there will be a difference. It's kind of slight difference, but yet it is important. In Exodus 20, we have that you shall not covet your neighbor's house, his wife, his male servant, his female servant, his ox, donkey, blah, 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 all of that. So wife is the part of the house. Okay? Here, what we have is you should not covet your neighbor's wife, and you shall not desire or covet, is basically the same word, his house. And his house, not necessarily the building, his house as a ownership, household includes male servants, female servants, oxes, donkeys, and blah, 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 and all of that. Okay? So, after 38 years in the wilderness, Moses, under divine inspiration, before they go into the land, sets apart wife as a very important part of man's life, but she is not in his dominion. Okay? So whenever you hear that the Bible is very patriarchal book and women had no rights whatsoever, they always were abused. They were treated really poorly, and men were jerks. Okay, the last thing probably was true. Men are jerks. No questions asked, Welcome to the club. But seriously, what we have in the Bible, and we've talked about this last time, in the book of Numbers, we see an example where when ladies come to Moses and they say that, we do not have a brother. Our father died. What's going to be with us? Are we going to get the inheritance? And after consulting with God, Moses gives a ruling. If family has no sons, the inheritance that Lord provides for them in the land will be spread with the girls. The only one rule is they need to marry within the tribe. Okay? So if a man is, let's say, from tribe of Judah, for whatever reason fell in love with a girl from tribe of Benjamin, he can marry her and she would be absorbed into tribe of Judah. But if the lady in the tribe of Benjamin does not have a brother and that's her inheritance, she needs to stay within the tribe of Benjamin. Okay? So that's somewhat important. And since they lived somewhat closer together, and there was no Facebook at that time, or TikTok or something like that, so nobody were ticked, nor tots, so that probably worked out. So here, what we see right in 10 Commandments as a special, very honorable place at the right hand of the husband. And then there is a house. So there is man, there is his wife, and then there is property. Okay? That's an important thing. There is one more important thing that I need to tell you for today, is we need to go to Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 14 to 17. Okay. Overall, in chapters 16 to 18, we have the rules and regulations for leaders, for spiritual leaders. So that's why it is kind of a comment on the commandment about honoring father and mother. Because those who are in authority, you're kind of fathers and mothers. Okay? But in chapter 17 particularly, we have rules for the king. Why it is important? Okay, again, First of all, looking back to the beginning of our lesson, if the idea of the king was not presented until times of Josiah, which is roughly middle of the 7th century, that means that the kings like Saul or David or Solomon or anybody had no rules how to live. What was the problem? But in reality, it is given by Moses, and Moses promises to them, when you will enter into the land, you might choose the king. So when they were looking for Saul as the first king, the problem was not that they looked for the king. The problem is they wanted the king like nations around them. Okay? Therefore, the guy would be, hopefully, Saul was almost destined or predestined for, doom, for fall. Okay? Because if you ask for a king who would be like king of other nations are led by foreign gods. And therefore, no blessing. But you might choose a king from your brothers, and he needs to follow 3 simple rules. Let's see the rules. Rule number 1. When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving to you, and possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations around me, you may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. Okay? No other nation second time. You might see an example in other nations, but you will choose the king whom God will give you. Okay? Whom God will choose for you. One from among your brothers you shall set as the king over you. You may not put a foreigner who is not your brother. Only he must not... Okay, now the rules are. Rule number 1. He must not acquire many horses for himself and cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses. Okay? Since the Lord said it. Rule number 2. You shall not return to that way again. Okay. Verse 17. He shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart will turn away, and nor he shall acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. So he should not have 3 things: horses, too many wives, and too much money. Okay? And most importantly, not his money, but his taxes. Okay? That's about taxes. Not about state of Texas, but you know what I'm talking about. Why horses? Horses, okay, in the good old days.
Run away.
No, that's not the problem. The horses in the good old days, nobody ever would plow on horses or go from city to city on horses. Okay? That's why you have donkeys. That's why you have mules or something like that. Horses were used for a war and military purposes mostly. You either ride as a knight or you have a chariot. So those things can be used as bikes or cars, motorized cars, or tanks. So if you have horses or chariots, you run into somebody's infantry and they're just simply smashed. Okay? So the idea is Israel, a king, should not be prepared for offensive war. We have rules for Israel, a king, for defensive war in another part of Deuteronomy, but not offense. You do not need to grab the land by force. You need to have treaties, you need to have a gospel and outreach influence, and you need to convert people so they will join you. Okay? So not offensive war. You do not need to bring too many wives. Okay? And it does not specify what is too many. No, I believe more than one is too many. But, I'll give you one biblical example where it will be very clear it's too many. Okay? And the second and third one is not too many taxes. Now, if the Deuteronomy did not exist in the times of David and Solomon, we have a serious problem. We have a serious problem. Why God got upset with Solomon. Let's go into 1 Kings chapter 10.
broke the rules.
Not yet.
Almost.
We will come to that. We'll come to girls. Let's go to chapter 10 first. So 1 Kings 10, and we need to begin with verse, I think it's 14, but let me see. Yes, I'm right. Sometimes I am right. Okay, 1 Kings 10, 14. What do we have there? Now, the weight of gold that came to Solomon, okay, as Texas, in one, or actually it would be better to translate in each year, every single year, was 666 talents of gold. Okay? So, first of all, mark that phrase, and I will give you a small comment on that. But, for all of us, who knows what a talent of gold is? Nobody knows. So for us, it's just numbers. We don't really know. It's a lot. You know, it's like few trains filled with golds. You know, just piles of gold. You know, trains. Like, yeah, what?
Isn't it like a year's wage, basically, for the kind of a normal working man's wage?
No.
Not even.
No. The year's wage for a normal worker is 1 denarius per day. So you have 360 roughly with some vacations. 360 denarius. It's not a talent of gold. So 666 talents of gold is a huge amount of money for very small territory. It's a territory kind of like probably size of New Jersey. Okay? Now think about that. If, let's just compare our budget, you know, if the whole budget of the United States would be gathered, or in Texas, would be gathered for New Jersey. That's kind of would be a right comparison. So, too much gold immediately. Now, let's go into verse 26. Chapter 10, verse 26. What Solomon does. Thus Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and in wisdom. Well, so far so good. Verse 26. And Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen.
Wartime.
And he had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king in Jerusalem. Okay? Now, where did those horses, the horses is bad by itself. Where those horses came from, verse 28. Solomon's import of horses was from Egypt and the Q. Okay? So, that's bad. So, strike 2. Now, we go to 11:1. Everybody knows about that verse. But we need to understand, before we go to 11:1, we need to see 10:14 and 10:26. Okay? 11:1. What do we have there? Now, King Solomon loved many foreign women among the daughters, so along with his first wife, who was a daughter of Pharaoh, which is fine. Moabite, Ammonite, blah, 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 so on and so forth. So let's see verse 3. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines.
Huh?
So how many total?
He's busy.
1,000. So
He was busy.
how many more too many he had? He had 999 too many.
That would be right.
He had one and then 999 too many. Okay?
Busy
So
boy.
the thing is, if we do not have these rules, we do not really understand why the Lord got upset with him. But when we see that he strike 1, strike 2,
did
strike
all-
3,
All the bad stuff.
over. All the rulings are here in the Bible, how you can be a godly leader. All rulings are here, how you can be a godly king. Okay? It's very simple, very plain. So that's why it is important for us. If you read the relevancy of the book, reading the book of Deuteronomy, we see the rules and regulations that people of Israel should follow upon their entrance into the land. And many places in the New Testament show that in Christ, we reach the promised land. You know, we reach the promised land that are given to us through Messiah. Therefore, many of these rules and regulations, commandments and testaments, can and should be a helpful guide or guiding line for the life of a regular Christian. Okay? Questions or comments?